Hello and welcome to Business Standards Morning Show. I am Ruchika Chitravanshi and let us take a quick look at the stories for today. The services of Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram were disrupted for at least 6 hours on the night of October 4th, India time. This was because of the collapse of Facebook's global system, and this had an impact on millions of people, if not billions. How are businesses, particularly in India, affected by such events? And what can regulators do about them? We take a look in this report.
Social media services Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp were recently hit by an outage that lasted almost 6 hours. Given that it was night in India at the time of the outage, it may not have had as much impact here as in other places. But it should make businesses and policymakers consider how essential companies like Facebook and Google are to the economy. Businesses, especially, should consider the risks involved, since so many of them depend heavily on just 2 or 3 such platforms. Let's look at some numbers involved just with Facebook's family of services. According to PIB and the Ministry of Electronics and IT, India had 410 million Facebook users, 530 million WhatsApp users, and 210 million Instagram users as of February this year. Data from the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India show that the total number of internet users in the country stood at 825.30 million at the end of March 2021. So, that implies just under 50% of India's internet users are also Facebook users. 1/4 of them also use Instagram. And at least 64% of them are WhatsApp users too. The risks that an outage of services like these poses isn't just about not being able to post your latest selfie or vacation pictures on social media. There may be a deeper problem. As of April of 2019, an estimated 1.5 million small and medium businesses, or SMBs, from India were reported to be using Facebook in order to reach out to customers. This was just 10 months after Facebook had said in June of 2018 that it had 900,000 SMBs on board from India. That gives a sense of how quickly and by how much that number has been growing. And this was before the pandemic pushed a greater number of both consumers and businesses online. According to a recent report, Facebook connected with 9 million Indian small businesses during its outreach program in 2020. Instant messaging service WhatsApp's footprint on businesses in the country is even larger. In July of 2020, WhatsApp had told news agencies that it had over 50 million users of its business app globally, of whom over 15 million were in India. During the COVID-19 pandemic and the resultant lockdowns, there were a number of reports about how WhatsApp had become a lifeline for many small businesses in the country. SMBs use these platforms to build a digital presence and reach potential customers. They are also crucial for internal communications and operations. A disruption during business hours, or one that lasts longer than the recent outage, could seriously impact business operations, especially for SMBs. And beyond business, our reliance on it for basic day-to-day communications makes WhatsApp more akin to a crucial public infrastructure rather than a simple digital service. With all this in mind, we go to Business Standards Neha Alavadi to get a better understanding of how regulators can deal with such events.
Probably a good approach to look at this would probably be to think of these systems as virtual infrastructure. There is enough provisions in the IT Act if a business wants to go and take up a challenge or challenge Facebook legally for any tangible loss that they may have suffered. There is, I spoke to a few legal experts, and they do agree that there are provisions in the IT Act under which you can, go and challenge Facebook not being able to provide the kind of service that they promised you, but that would be through an extrapolation of the act. From a regulatory perspective, what a government or regulatory body and bureaucrats can look at is maybe understand what is a good what is an optimum maybe downtime that businesses can work with. And this was a global outage. Different parts of the world would have been affected differently. Some people had working hours going on, some people didn't. In India, it was night for us, so probably we didn't have as much of an impact as, say, in the US or countries where it was daytime. So maybe a good way to look at it probably would be, maybe fix a certain number of hours or a certain number of a certain amount of time for which they would be okay with a certain amount of downtime. Having a one size fits all kind of approach is not going to be a very good regulatory approach to this. You can, of course, maybe measure it in terms or quantify it in terms of the amount of loss that a business suffers, for example. Beyond this threshold, we are going to penalize you, for example. But then again, you will have to see how much of it was in the company's control, how much of it was deliberate, how much of it was, how quickly did they work to get systems back up, etc.
These three services, which have a very wide presence in the lives of millions of people, Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram, went down simultaneously. Such outages can have a systemic risk. People across the globe, including policymakers, therefore, might increasingly think whether Facebook and its subsidiaries should be so closely linked together.
After a 7% economic contraction in 2020-21 financial year, India is eyeing over 9% growth in FY22. However, with extreme job losses, migration of labor from high productive to low productive jobs, and high inflation, policymakers may have to rethink the target of a 5 trillion economy by 2025. In an interview with Business Standard, former Reserve Bank Governor D. Subbarao explained why doubling the economy in 4 years might be too ambitious.
Let me begin by asking you, sir, how are you assessing the state of the economy now that we are coming out of the second wave? So if we are able to, sustain this recovery, what is your outlook on the medium term for the Indian economy?
Well, I've just spoken about it. The economy contracted by 7.3% last year. Estimates are that it will expand by 9.5 to 10% this year, which is a V-shaped recovery, but only in a very technical sense, because even if we actually grow by 9.5 to 10% this year, the output this fiscal year, FY22, will still be lower than what it would have been had there been no pandemic. It would be 6 to 7% lower. So there would be some permanent loss of income, which is quite distressing in any country, particularly in a poor country like ours, because the burden of this loss of permanent income is falling on the lower segments of the population.
Right.
It's they who've lost jobs, who've lost incomes, who've run up debt, and inequalities have widened. So I think as much as it's a matter of comfort that the economy has recovered, we must be sensitive to the scars it's going to leave behind.
So, sir, is there any prescription to how do we, bridge this gap of inequality that we have seen because
There
of
are
the pandemic?
lots of things we need to do. It's just difficult to tell them in an interview.
Just
But
one
I
or
think
two, but important
we need
points.
to focus on creating employment, because again, the employment situation is quite distressing. People have lost jobs. The number of people employed is actually coming down, not just in percentage terms, but in absolute terms. And labor is shifting from high productive manufacturing sector to low productive agriculture sector, which is the reverse of what should be happening. Because development experience, labor should move from low productivity agriculture to higher productivity industry as countries get richer. But we're moving in the reverse direction. So I think we should pay specific attention to creating employment as much as we pay attention to growth.
And so for that, from that point of view, government also introduced Atmanirbhar Bharat package. So do you think that will be enough to have an employment, or do we need more to be on a sustainable growth trajectory?
The Atmanirbhar package is a very wide canvas. And the employment problem is also very deep and very wide. It's not as if it's come today. We've had an employment problem, it's getting worse. So as much as the Atmanirbhar package has many objectives, many targets, white canvas, I don't think that by itself can be an adequate solution to the employment problem. Of course, to create employment, you need investment. As much as Atmanirbhar's objective is to generate investment, it will contribute to investment. But for employment purposes, we need to do more than generating investment. We need to see that more people are into or at least medium and small industries are supported because they are employment intensive relative to large corporates. We need to concentrate or focus on enhancing skills so that productivity goes up.
Right.
So you spoke about the need for capex. The government needs to invest in infrastructure. The industry, the private segment needs to invest in creating more capacities. But the private sector won't invest in capacities till they see the demand coming.
Right.
And with a squeeze on consumption, with a squeeze on the disposable income in people's hand, it's a conundrum. So how does one come out of this conundrum?
I'm hoping that as the economy grows 9.5 to 10% this year, some of the slack will be used up. And there's also going to be demand from exports, right? Because investment will also respond to exports. So I'm hoping that the first trigger for investment demand will come from exports, and investment demand from domestic consumption will pick up after that.
And how much of a time gap do you see between?
I really have no idea. But hopefully next fiscal year we should see private investment demand picking up.
So one last question, sir. We have a target of $5 trillion economy by 2024-25. Given the state of the economy right now, what's an honest opinion on this? Can we reach that goal by 2024-25, or do you see the can getting kicked down the road, or the $5 trillion being trimmed to, let's say,
2025 looks difficult. I don't know what the absolute number now is. Maybe 2.5 trillion, something like that. Yeah, doubling that in a matter of 4 years is very difficult. So I think we should be more realistic, but still have ambitious but challenging targets. Challenging but realizable targets.
The Reserve Bank of India's 3-day Monetary Policy Committee meeting ends on Friday. The consensus view is that of a status quo on key rates, though the central bank could tinker with policies to help suck out excess liquidity from the system. How will the markets react to a surprise? What's priced in and what's not? Let us find out.
The 3-day meeting of the Monetary Policy Committee is already underway, and RBI Governor Shaktikanta Das is scheduled to announce the outcome on Friday, 8th of October. A Business Standard policy poll of 14 leading economists and market participants has suggested that the central bank might maintain the status quo on rates and also the accommodative stance, but hints on policy normalization, starting with the removal of excess liquidity, will also be watched. At present, the repo rate stands at 4%, reverse repo rate at 3.35% and the cash reserve ratio at 4%. Pankaj Pathak, who is fund manager at Quantum Mutual Fund, said, "From a bond market perspective, liquidity guidance would be the key driver for short tenor bonds, while longer maturity bonds would depend on the quantum of GSAP." For CARE Ratings chief economist Madan Sabnavis, the RBI's language with respect to liquidity will hold a greater importance.
there is a lot of discussion, a lot of expectation that the RBI will have to roll back on all the liquidity measures at some point of time. So therefore, we would be looking to read the language a bit more clearly to see if the RBI is taking any definite stance about whether it would be rolling back the liquidity measures, starting with probably increasing the reverse repo rate, also addressing the issue of GSAPs and OMOs, and more importantly, whether it does see inflation being something which will be there to stay, which could at some point of time lead to an increase in the repo rate.
That apart, other key factors to watch out for in the RBI policy will be the possibility of revision in GDP or inflation forecast, especially against the backdrop of rising crude oil prices.
Whether the RBI or the MPC is going to revise the GDP forecast for the year. It's been put at 9.5% earlier, and given the fact that some of the high-frequency indicators do indicate that things have improved faster than what was expected, there could be an upward revision to it. Along with this, I think even in case of the inflation forecast, which has been put at 5.7%, there could be a tendency to lower it, though this would of course be interesting because the RBI will also weigh the recent increase in crude oil prices along with the great moderation which we have seen in food prices while taking a call on it.
Echoing similar views, G. Chokalingam, who is founder of Economics Research and Advisory, expects a status quo policy from the RBI.
I firmly believe that the status quo would be maintained largely. They will not touch the interest rates for few reasons. The projected growth is 9% for current fiscal. This is after minus 7.3% in FY21, which eventually means the GDP in FY22 will be, in absolute term, would be more or less same like what we saw in FY20. So after 2 years also, the absolute GDP would hardly go up by, about 1%. So basically the stress would be there on the economy front. So they would not derive the growth by hiking the rate. And again, the US Fed itself is proposing to, spread the reversal of monetary policy in 2022-23. So therefore, there is no need for India to hurry up and derail the growth. As I said, the growth is back to stagnating level as compared to FY20, the GDP level. So therefore, the status quo will be definitely maintained.
Clearly, the consensus seemed to be in the favor of a status quo on policy. But how should investors play the markets ahead of the policy?
So there is not much scope for the market to rally for RBI's intense accommodative policy. Only by any chance I go wrong and RBI increases the rate by 25 to 50 basis points, then the market might correct 1 or 2%, but which I don't expect. So therefore, the market would remain on a sideways after announcement of the policy.
So while we wait for the RBI triggered action to unfold on Friday, expect the markets to trade sideways till then, with participants hesitant to build fresh, larger positions ahead of the key event. After the RBI policy, the focus will shift to the earnings season, with IT major TCS set to announce its September quarter numbers post-market hours on Friday. On Thursday, however, the markets could remain range-bound with stock-specific action continuing. That said, with the indices near record high, experts advise investors to remain selective and look for quality stocks.
So advice to the shareholder, the public investor as a retail investor is that don't put borrowed money at the feet of the market. 2, if you have a debt, start using some of the profits to reduce your existing debts. 3, at least around 50% of the money you keep parking in small and with cash, but without compromising on the quality of management, quality of balance sheet and valuation comfort.
There has been a lot of activity in India's primary markets this financial year, with as many as 24 companies raising a total of 47,000 crore through the IPO route in the first 6 months. At least 2 issues, Paras Defence and Space Technologies and GR Infra Projects, have listed at a premium of more than 100%, more than doubling investors' wealth. So, what is an IPO? How does the process work? How much time does it take for a company to go public? Here's a lowdown.
If you are feeling lost in the sea of financial news, Business Standard has you covered. Of late, several companies have come out with their IPOs and got listed on stock exchanges. What is an IPO, you ask? Well, let's understand through a hypothetical case. Suppose there's an entrepreneur, Rahul, who wants to start a furniture business. Rahul starts the business with his own money and some more from friends and family. The money helps him produce some furniture items. For the next few years, Rahul puts the money that he makes from selling the furniture back into the business. He is able to produce more models, service more customers, and even open a second store. But Rahul has bigger plans. So he goes to an investor. The investor invests money in his business in return for equity. By doing so, the investor becomes a shareholder in Rahul's business. Rahul's furniture business has become big, with stores in every metro city. Now he wants to make it a full-fledged chain and even export his furniture. For this, he decides to tap public markets for money. This is where an IPO comes in. IPO stands for Initial Public Offering. Basically, it is the process of selling a portion of the company to public shareholders like you and me. The company then gets listed on stock exchanges like the NSE or BSE, and its shares are traded actively. It often takes months, even years, to successfully complete an IPO. Let's see how Rahul does it. Rahul first has to hire investment bankers. These people conduct detailed analysis of the company, audit financials, and streamline processes according to the best practices. They also help Rahul create a draft red herring prospectus, which is an exhaustive document that tells prospective investors everything about the business. But wait, for an IPO in India, the company has to be of a certain size. It must be profitable and must have had at least 15 crore rupees in profits in each of the previous 3 years. The business's valuation must be at least 10 crore rupees, and the promoters must have at least 3 years of experience running the business. The next step is roadshows. Roadshows are basically presentations to large institutional investors to drum up interest. Meanwhile, Rahul has to put an application with the Securities Exchange Commission of India, which must sign off on the IPO. Now Rahul and his investment bankers open the issue on a set date over a couple of days. This is when institutional investors and the public bid to buy shares in Rahul's furniture business. Eventually, shares are allotted to qualified bidders, and boom, the IPO is done. Rahul's furniture business is now listed on a stock exchange, and active trading in its shares begin. So the next time you see an IPO taking place, we hope you will remember Rahul's story and know exactly how the process would have worked.
That's all we have for you today. We will be back with more news and analysis. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.